In this presentation, we'll be talking about harmonic sequences. Sequences are musical patterns. They're typically incorporating the repetition of a motive or figuration on successively higher or lower pitch levels. This could be a melodic sequence, a harmonic sequence, or both. Sequences are divided into units called legs, which consist of one complete iteration of a sequential pattern. So one chunk of a sequence that is then repeated is known as the sequential leg. Typically, each leg is made up of two harmonies. Those sequences with more harmonies than two in their legs do exist. For a sequence to be considered as such, it needs to have at least two legs. If a sequence only had one leg, it wouldn't be a sequence. It would just be a harmonic progression. A sequence is determined by the fact that harmonic relationship in that progression is repeated higher or lower. Let's talk about the origins of a sequence. The origin of the sequence lies basically in the harmonization of stepwise motion. Sequences from the common practice era will almost always demonstrate some element of stepwise motion. Here we have downward stepwise motion in a G major scale. That's the first step of the evolution. Now, if we were to form the simplest type of harmonization for that, just a third away from those first notes, we'd have this. Nice little harmonic idea. That could be easily harmonized. Now, let's say that we rhythmically offset that stepwise harmonization and created a suspension chain. That's quite nice. Then we could have simple third harmonization of the lower voice as well. Then let's have some simple third harmonization of the upper voice. So we have two strands of thirds offset from each other. Now, let's analyze that. 1, 4, 4, 3, 7, half diminished 7, 3, 4, 3, 6, 7, 2, 4, 3, 5, 7, 1. So first of all, here we have the origin of the circle of fifths. And as you might be aware, the circle of fifths is itself a sequence. And highlighted in blue here are the legs of the sequence. 4 to 7, 3 to 6, 2 to 5, and then we finally get back to 1. And we can tell that that's the pattern because we can look at, in this case, the chord inversions. Here we have 4-3 to root position, then 4-3 to root position, then 4-3 to root position, then back to 1. So that's what's making up the sequence in this style, is the repetition of a harmonic pattern that particularly is emphasizing some aspect of stepwise motion. These basic frameworks can easily be ornamented and with lots of different ornaments being layered on top to make them more and more interesting. So you could have motives, melodies, all this on top of harmonic sequences, as we see below in the excerpt from J.S. Bach's Chaconne from the Partita for Solo Violin BWV 1004. Now, in this case, the sequence starts on the one chord, and we have a new leg every measure. So that's our first leg. Yum, bum, bum, ba, ya, da, 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 dum. Then it's repeated down a step. Then the last time he breaks it, so that we head towards the cadence. Now, the circled notes help us see the stepwise motion that it's ornamenting. Until we finally get to our 5 chord. So even in this highly ornamented version, Bach is following the rules. He's taking the basic idea, ornamenting stepwise motion, and keeping it essentially 2 harmonies per leg, and then it's just the patterns that are shifted down by step. Now, there are several types of sequences used in the common practice era, and they're named for certain harmonic or melodic features that they display. Note that there are plenty of other sequences possible. I'm just going over some of the most common types. These types include the circle of fifths, the reverse circle of fifths, the sequence by third. And when we are dealing with sequences, we could use part of the sequential pattern or all of the sequential pattern. As long as there's more than one leg, we get a sequence. Let's talk about the circle of fifths sequence, which you can find more information about in the harmonic progression and harmonic functionality video. The circle of fifths sequence is named for the root motion between each of its harmonies. This is by far the most common sequence in the common practice era. It involves each harmony moving downwards by fifth or ascending by fourth. It's the same thing. So in major, it proceeds, if we stay let's go to F major. So that would be 1, down to 4, down to 7, down to 3, down to 6, and then to 2, and then to 5, and then to 1. Now you'll notice that I tried to keep going down in the bass voice, but if you keep doing that, you run out of keys. So that's why we will alternate between going down by fifth and going up by fourth, since it means the same thing. F down a fifth is B flat, F up a fourth is B flat. So one more time, that's 1, 4, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. In minor, it proceeds like this. We'll jump over to F minor. 1, minor 4, major 7, 6, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Notice that in this case we use the natural minor scale when we're in the middle, so we use that flat 7 and we use major 3. It's only when we get to the end of the circle of fifths in minor that we use that harmonic minor scale for 5 to 1. Note that when we're using these, we can of course use sevenths, as we saw in that graphic about the origination of sequences. Sevenths are absolutely fine to use in sequences, and they sound great. So let's talk about the reverse circle of fifths. This is named for the root motion between each of its harmonies as well, but in this case we go backwards when compared with the normal circle of fifths. In this case, the reverse circle of fifths descends by fourth or ascends by fifth. It is less common because it's using retrogressions. That means harmonic successions that move in the reverse direction of the typical types of harmonic progressions. This will become pretty clear as soon as I start playing. So if we're in C major, this progression sounds like this. 1, 5, 2, 6, that should be a 3 on the screen, 3, 7, 4, 1. Now, after the first couple of legs, your ear accepts it. It's used to the pattern. But at first, that 1 to 5 to 2 feels a little weird. Feels more like modal music, less like tonal music. And then in minor, it would sound like this. Oh, that sounds real funky. 1 to minor 5 to diminished 2, and then onwards, I accidentally left out 6, 6 to 3 to 7 to 4 to 1. So you can see how that is a little rough on the ears, and it could be less common. Now, There's certainly examples of both of these, but they are not nearly as common as the normal circle of fifth sequence, sequenced by descending fifth, ascending fourth. And like all sequences, sevenths and inversions may be added to either the major or minor forms. Let's talk a little bit about sequence by third. Sequences by third are so called because of the root motion, not from chord to chord, so this one's different. This is about the root motion from leg to leg. When we were talking about the circle of fifth sequence, we were talking about chord to chord motion. Each chord is a fifth apart. Here, the sequence, the title is referring to leg to leg. And the typical progression is 1, 5, 6, 3, and then 4, 1. If that sounds familiar, that's because you've probably heard it in Pachelbel's canon. And then he gives us a cadence. Now you'll notice that each chord, there's a mix of motions here. We've got root motion down a fourth, and then up a step. So that's why it's not referred to by its root motion, because there's a mix of them. In this case, it's frequently referred to by this title, sequence by third, because if you go from leg to leg, here's leg number 1. The next leg starts on a 6, which is a third lower than 1. And then we get to the 4, a third lower than 6. And then 5, 7, 1, and here we are. Now, a slightly more sublime version, in my humble opinion, is Ludwig van Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 30 in E major. Note the inversion use here. 1, 5, 6, 6, 3, 6, 4, 1, 6. Then we get to the cadence. Note that in each leg, the inversion happens in the same relative spot. So if you think of 2 slots for each leg, the inversion in this case is happening in the second one. Now it doesn't always have to happen in the second one, but it's in any sequence that you find, the inversions or the additions of sevenths will be in the same relative position for each leg. So again, here it's happening in the second harmony slot. Root position, first inversion. Second leg is root position, first inversion. First inversion. Then root position, first inversion. Root position for the cadence. There are other types of sequences that can be grouped into a general category of stepwise sequences. You can also classify these by the specific types of root motion that they display. For instance, the ascending stepwise sequence below displays a up a fourth, down a third motion, which is very common, particularly in the Baroque era. So this is from Bach's Gigue Fugue, or at least it's attributed to Bach. And you see that as we approach this final cadence, we have a mix of different sequences. We start in G major on a 1-6 chord. Then we head over to 4, 2, 6, 5, 3, 6, 6, 4, 6, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 7, 1. Then we get our cadence. So, if we look first at the ascending stepwise sequence, we'll see 4, then going to 2, so it's going down a third. Then it goes up a fourth, or up a fourth or down a fifth. So 5, and then 3, 6, and then 6, and then 4, 6. So we have that back and forth of fourth to third motion. Then we end with a circle of fifth sequence to bring us to our final cadence. And then our last cadence. So you can mix and match these sequences, you can play around with them, you can create your own. Now, I want to return to this idea of sevenths and inversions, adding them in. So it's perfectly acceptable to add inversions and sevenths to harmonic sequences. However, it is important to recall that sequences are all about repetitions of legs. If an inversion is included, the same inversion should be included at the same point in each of the legs. The same is true of seventh chords. Let's take a look at this first column, which goes through the circle of fifth sequence. 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. In the first column, I've divided it so that each row has a different leg. 1 to 4, 7 to 3, 6 to 2, 5 to 1. And in that first column, I've added inversion symbols. But you'll notice that in each leg, that inversion symbol is added in the same relative spot. In this case, the second chord. Again, it doesn't matter which one that you put the inversion in. It doesn't matter which inversion you use, or if you add a seventh. It just needs to happen at the same relative spot in each leg. So in this case, we have a root position, then first inversion. 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 Now, sometimes you'll see that rule broken in the fourth leg, or even the third leg sometimes, but we want to set up that pattern, and you hear it in the bass voice. So that it sets up our expectations. Same thing if we had sevenths. If we were adding those, I've added in the second column a first inversion seventh chord to the first spot in each leg. So here we have 1, 6, 5 to 4, 7, 6, 5 to 3, 6, 6, 5 to 2, and 5, 6, 5 to 1. That's perfectly fine. Now, less idiomatic is the last column, which has basically every inversion and seventh inversion that I could think of thrown in. And it sounds like this. It's even difficult to play. We don't get that same sense of creating a pattern, which is what the sequences are all about.